Hey guys, welcome back. Last time we were able to set up our Next.js project. So in this one, we're going to go ahead and fetch a list of campaigns from our server and display them using Next.js on the front end. So I'm here on the Next.js website. So they have 3 unique ways to fetch data from the server. We can implement get static props. Basically, we use this when we want to fetch data at build time, and we have get static paths. So this works hand in hand with get static props to be able to generate routes based on the data. So we're going to be working with these two. Get server-side props is specific for server-side rendering. So if you wanted to be fetching data on every request, we'd be using this. In our case, we're going to be using the static generation approach such that the data is prefetched at build time and the pages are pre-rendered. Aside from that, we are also going to be able to set up custom fonts with our Next.js projects and also write some styles to make it look like this. So we'll also look at how to use environment variables and use them in the browser, and we'll talk a little bit about what the difference is and how Next.js works with them. Okay, so this is where we stopped up from. Now I'm going to go back to our VS Code project. So in the source folder, we have the pages folder, and this is where our index.js is, and this is where we want to work. So I'm going to go ahead and remove everything. So for now, I'm just going to create an H1. All right, so if we check here again, we should have available campaigns, and you can see we have just a typical H1. So right now let's work on configuring our application to use a custom font. So we'll be using a font called Meriwether Sans. So let me go ahead and bring it up, and we can get it on Google Fonts. So what we want to do is we want to come to fonts.google.com. We're also going to use another font called Nonito. So over here, let's say we want to get the regular 400 and maybe a 700 one. We're just going to get the bold. So we have these two here, and if we wanted to use them, if we wanted to link to them, we would go ahead and copy this link here. So I'm going to copy this, and now that we have our font, the question is, where do we put them? So we would want all our websites to use these fonts. So it would not be ideal to add these fonts on every page, like in the pages folder. But what you can do is, if we come over here in the docs, if we come here on the Next.js docs, we have something called a document. We have some information that tells us about what it's about and how we can use that. So you can see that we could create a document that augments our application's HTML and body tags. And the way it works is it uses all this Next.js stuff. What you have to know about this is we can use this to set up things like fonts, to load any other extra JavaScript we would want to load. So what you can do is we're going to need to create something similar. So I'm going to copy this whole document here. And in our application, in the pages folder, we want to create an underscore document.js file. So over here, then we can go ahead and paste in what we got from the documentation, and we can go ahead and export it. So export default, it's called my document. So we are not going to be working with get initial props. So we are only going to be worrying about how our HTML is rendered, and we are going to need to work inside the head. If you think about our regular HTML page or structure, we usually have the HTML and then the head and then the body. Now here in the head is where we would add things like links to external CSS, links to fonts. So over here, I'm going to open this one up, and we're going to add our links to the fonts. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get our font. So we're going to go back to the browser. So on the Meriwether Sans, you're going to go ahead and select the 400. So 400 is the font weight. So let's select this. Let's also grab the 700. All right. Let's also go and grab the Nonito font. So what you can do is here, we can go ahead and refresh this. So let's refresh here. So that's going to go ahead and see that we've selected some other fonts before. So what you can do is also select the Nonito font. So I'm going to select the regular 400, and yeah, so that's going to do it. Now what we need to do is go ahead and copy these links here. So I'm going to copy these, go back to our VS Code. So in our document in our underscore document.js, since we are not using it in a regular JS project but a JSX project here, we can go ahead and fix these errors by closing these tags. So let's also close this and save. And that's going to go ahead and include our fonts. Now Now, since we want our font to be used on every web page, we have a file where we can put our global styles, and in styles, that file is called global.css. So what you can do here is we can change which font we use in the body to use our own, and also we're going to change the fonts that our paragraphs are going to use. So to use the Nonito one. So I'm going to come here, and down here we have a way we can specify them. So I'm just going to copy the first one, and where we have, and here on the font family, just going to replace the default ones to use our Merriweather. So once we save that, we also want to change paragraphs to use our Nonito font. So here you can say all paragraphs should use a Nonito font. Now let's go ahead and copy the style for that. Should be chap. So here we can include our font and save. So if I go back to index.js, I'm going to create a paragraph. So P. Let's make sure these are in one parent element. And this is just the same way React works. Like this is just React. There's nothing new here. So we always want to make sure that all our elements have one parent element. So now if you go back to the site, we should be able to see that this changes. So to verify, I'm going to go ahead and remove the styles, and we see if this changes at all. I'm going to go ahead and comment this. So I'm going to comment this and this. Now I've not really saved, so things are still good. But notice when I save, so I'm going to come and save that. Come back over here, you can see that we lost the font. So that means that our font is integrated and things should be okay. So we can move on to now creating our page. So now let's go ahead and do our data fetching and display campaigns in our UI, and then we can go ahead and style them after. So back here, so whenever you're fetching data for the page, you want to fetch that data in the page. That helps out making sure that data is only fetched in the pages that it's needed from. I'm going to come over here, and whenever we want to fetch data and we want to make sure that Next.js fetches it at build time, we want to export an async function called getStaticProps. So what you can do here is we want to say export async. It has to be async because inside there we need to do an asynchronous operations. So let's call it getStaticProps, and this is how you have to call this. Anything else will not work really, and this is how Next.js understands that this should be fetching data at build time. So you want to make sure you call it this. So inside here we can go ahead and fetch our data. So what we can do here is we can use fetch to get this data. So I'm going to go ahead and say const response equals await. So since we are in an async function, and we can use await. So let's await fetch. Inside here, we need to put the URL that we're going to fetch data from. So if you go back to our documentation, we need to call this endpoint for get campaigns. And by the way, let's first try it here in the docs, and it's going to send us this. So this is what we want to call, just like we called it here, but now we want to call it using fetch. So I'm going to copy this and bring it in the code. So that's what we want to put here. And later I'm going to be showing you how to put this in an environment variable. So that's going to give us a response, but then with fetch, the actual data is in another promise. So here we can do const data equals await. So we want to await response, then we want to transform that into JSON, and that's going to be our data. So from here, we need to return props. So we need to return an object that has props. All right, and this is how it should be. This is the way it should be. You want to make sure you return something called props here, and then down here you can return any props. So since we want to return the data, we can say data. We can say data will be data, and also we can return anything else here, and that should be available as props to our page. So to test it out, let's return something called done. We're going to send that as true. So now once we create our async function and return props here, these props are going to be available in the page itself. So here we can destructure them. We can say data and also done. All right. So let's go ahead and console log this. So we're going to console log data. So I'm also going to console log done. The way I'm getting this console log, you can see I'm able to type CLO and click enter, and things work. And that's because I have an extension called ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native snippets. This is the one that gives us this functionality, and it's the one that we can use to generate the React components. So now if you go back to our application, so I'm going to open up the Chrome JavaScript console, and we come here. So you can see down here that we got data, and the data is an array with the items from our server. So that means we are able to fetch the data from the server. So let's go ahead and just do something simple to display it on the page. So what you can do here, since data is going to be an array, we can go ahead and map over it and display it in a list. So here, let's use a div. So in here, I'm going to create a main. So now here, that's where we can put our available campaigns. And for now, I'm just going to map over them. So we're going to do data.map. So map takes in a callback function, and that callback function can access each element in that array. So let's have element, and we want to return a div. So let's return a div. It's going to represent a list item on our UI. And since this is React, remember, we need to pass keys. So React knows how to handle rendering of our list. So let's pass element. We need to use a unique property here, and we know that our tags are always unique, so that's what we want to use here. So inside here, we need to show an image and to also show the title and then the description. So I'm going to have a div that's going to contain both of those, and I'm going to have a first div that's going to contain the image. So we want to display them as flex, like left to right. So here I'm going to use the regular image, and then we're going to talk about the Next.js image component and how that's different from this. So for the source, so the source of this is going to be element dot. So let's take a look at our response from the API. So if we take a look, our image is dot logo. So that's what we want to use. So let's go here. I'm going to do dot logo. So let's close it. Let's apply some height and width. So height, let's send like 120. Let's apply some width. So we can specify an alt. So if it doesn't load, the user should know what's going on. So we can say campaign, maybe banner or something like that. So on the right, we want to have another div that's going to have a title, and then the, what else? The description. And also we're going to show some, and we're also going to show this date here when it was created. So let's have an h1 there, and here we can show the title. So let's just put element dot title. So let's also have the description. So we're just gonna have a p, and for the p we show the description, so element dot description. And we can use TypeScript to get autocomplete for these things, but that we are not gonna cover. We probably are gonna cover that in the future. So down here, let's also show the date when it was posted. So let's have element created at, like this, and save. Now, if you go back to our UI, so we're gonna go here and come back here. You can see that we are able to display this on the page. One thing that's not working really well is the images. They're not being loaded, and the reason for that is because on the server we are getting a relative path and not the absolute path. So every time we upload to Cloudinary, we only get the relative path. And to get the absolute path, we're going to go to our admin. So I'm just going to slash admin here. Then I'm going to click on the image from here. So if I click on this, you can see that it renders the image. But notice that it prefixes everything with up to here. So we're going to copy this. We're going to copy the prefix. So our relative URL starts at image/upload. So now what we can do is in our project. So here we can do what we got as the prefix. And we want to stop before /image, because /image is provided from the API. So if we come back here and check, you can see we have image. So we want to add a slash, make sure it's matching. So this is now going to be the prefix / our relative URL. So now if you go back to our application and go to the home page, you can see that now we are able to render the images. So let's talk a little bit about the image component that we get in Next.js. So I'm gonna come here and search for image. So this is a component that's built into Next.js, and it's built to enable optimizations. So the things that it gives us out of the box are loading the images only when we need to see them. So let's say a page had like very many images. It would go ahead and load only the images that the user is seeing. So whenever we scroll like down, then it can load those images dynamically. Also, if we went ahead and put this in a mobile view, you can see that we are still seeing the same image with the image size as we would see on the web, But when we're using the Next.js image component, it goes ahead and does the resizing for us depending on the device viewport. Looking at the examples, you guys can come over here and see what else you could do. So looking at these examples here, you can see that we can import it from next image. So I'm going to copy the import, and here, let's go ahead and import it. It's actually imported here. So that's the one we want to use. So instead of us using this regular HTML image, that's the one we want to use. So let's check now. So it crashes and then it tells us the hostname rescloudinary.com is not configured under images in your Next.js. So Next.js needs us to tell it about where we are loading our assets from, such that it can be able to do the optimizations. So I'm going to come here and we take a look at where they talk about that. So here they say to enable image optimizations for images hosted on an external website. In our case, they are hosted on Cloudinary. Use an absolute URL for the SRC and specify domains. So the domains are like the prefixes. So we need to do something like this. So what we can do is we're going to copy this, and we have the next conf file. So down here, the next.config file. Here is where we want to put the config. So let's bring this one in, and let's cut this one out. Cut this one out. So we specify images and then the domains. So the domains have to be an array. So in our case, what we need to do is, let's take a look at our error again. So what we need to do is specify res.cloudinary.com as our host name, so where we are getting the images from. So let's go here and replace example.com and this. So Cloudinary has built-in optimization itself, so that makes it a good fit for the Next.js component. And we're going to be seeing what kind of requests Next.js makes to Cloudinary. So once we change things in the config file, we always have to restart the server. So I'm going to stop it. So I'm going to stop this and restart it. So I'm going to run yarn dev again. So it's going to go ahead and restart it. And now, if we come back to our site, let's refresh it. Notice that the images are being shown properly using the Next.js image component. Okay, so for the props that we can send, we have to send the SRC, which we are doing, the width and the height. So there are some optional props. So there's layout. It does the resizing when the device width changes. But if you set fixed, then it's not going to change. So you take away the responsiveness bit of the component. So for now, this is going to do. So the next thing we're going to need to do is, let's talk a little bit about error handling. So let's say we were fetching something that didn't exist, or we got an error fetching this. What you want to do is, since we are using a wait here, we can wrap everything in try catch block. So we're going to do try catch, and I'm going to copy this whole code and take it in a try. So this is something we would expect to work. But now when we put it in the try, we can't access the data down here. So what we can do is define as a data here. So let data, let's set that one to empty, and then we assign it when we get it. So now that's going to mean we have the data, but how do we send the errors? So what happens when we get an error and we couldn't get the campaigns? So down here, before we return the props, so let's say we don't have any data. So let's say if no data length. So we can return something called a not found. So we can return an object that has a not found key. So you can say return not found. So if we return not found true, so for example here, I'm going to go ahead and make an error here. I'm going to remove this slash here, meaning that this should not work, and save. And that's going to make it that the data array is always going to be empty, meaning that this is going to catch, and this is going to throw, and this is going to be returned. So if we return this here and go back to our application and refresh it, notice that we get a 404 page here. So optimally, this might be something you want to do for some cases. This is not what we want to do in our scenario. In fact, what we want to do is tell the user that there was an error and possibly show that error to the user. So what you can do here is I'm going to come here, and instead of using this in the catch, so we can go up here and create an error property. So we can say let error, let's set it to null. Okay, So down here, when we get an error from fetch, so let's say we couldn't fetch, we can go ahead and assign it to our error. So we can just set it to, we can set error equals to the error we just got, and in the props, then we can return the error. So instead of us returning done, we are not using it for anything. We can return the error and set that one to the error, to errors. So let me go ahead and do this. And this should also be accessible in the page as errors. So here we can expect it. So let's go ahead and console log it too. And here, so if we have any errors, we are going to do a simple check. So we're going to say if we have errors, then let's go ahead and show them in a paragraph as error like this. So down here we have this as error. So that's what we want to return here. And by the way, when we are using ES6 and above, we don't have to set the values when the value is the same as the key. So we can just abbreviate it by doing it like this. You can see we get that error, so we can't show we can't show an object in a div. So what we can do, so for now, to be able to see what's going on, I'm just going to wrap everything in json.stringify. So let's have json.stringify and put the error in there. So something to point out here, whenever we are returning things in getStaticProps, it has to be of a serializable type. So we want to make sure that our error, the error we are getting from fetch, is something we can work with. So let me console log it, just so we might need to transform it. So here, I'm just going to say something went wrong instead. And then we see how to inspect the error and send a varied serialized type to the page in the props. So for now, let's just say something went wrong. So something to mention here, getStaticProps runs only on the server. So that means that whenever we do a console log inside here, it's not going to log in the browser at all. So if we go here and try to look for it here, we won't be able to find it. So what happens is whenever the code is being run on the server, the console logs, the prints, they all go inside the development server log. So down here, this is where we can find our console log for the error. Okay, so you can see we get fetch error invalid JSON response body at HTTP this unexpected token. So if we wanted to send this, we would go ahead and stringify it and then send it as a string. Say JSON stringify the error like this. So now if we go back to the site, if we go ahead and refresh it, you can see that we get something being shown on the screen. So you can say if we have error.message, then you can go ahead and send that. So error.message. Then we can say otherwise. So otherwise, that would mean that the error didn't come from the server. It's not a server generated error. It might be because we couldn't make the request. Then here we can say something went wrong. Okay, like this, or any message you would want to send. So if you come back here and refresh, now this should catch .message. So let's reload it, and you can see that we get the string. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my internet. So meaning we shouldn't be able to connect to the server. In fact, I should turn the server off. So if we come here and I got my Python and cut it out and go ahead and stop it. So I'm just going to Control-C and come back to our Next.js front end and try to reload. We couldn't really make the request, and now this is being sent as the error. And let's correct our error because we don't want to be causing the errors ourselves. And save. Let's refresh. And you can see that our things are back. So the last thing I'm going to be showing you guys is how to use environment variables. So if you go back to our application, you can see that we are setting the base URL inside the code. So what we can do here is we can cut this one away and set this to an environment variable. Use backticks here so we can embed a dynamic variable, and we can do something like and to access an environment variable, you can get it from process.env the name of the environment variable. So we have some environment variables that are built in. You can see all these. Now the one we want to access is going to be a base URL. So we are trying to reference an environment variable called base URL. Now for us to be able to set it, we need to create a file called .env.local. So this gives us environment variables that we can work with in development, and you can see that by default it gets grayed out and removed from Git. So here we can go ahead and set our base URL. So we can do base URL and set it to a value like this and restart it. Okay, so you can see it's going to pick up the environment variables. And now if you go back to the site, so I'm going to come back to the site and refresh it, and you can see that now we are getting things and we are using an environment variable for our API. One thing that I want to show you is all the environment variables we set are only accessible on the server. It makes sense that we're able to access it like this because get static props runs only on the server. So what if we wanted to use this in the browser? So let's say here we add a use effect. In fact, I'm just going to demonstrate that now. So this is a regular React hook and it runs on the browser like you would think. So here, let's say we wanted to console log this. So I'm just going to come and copy this up to here and go to the use effect and console log. And this should of course show in the browser now. So if we come here in the browser, so the base URL is undefined in the browser. So that means that environment variables are not really accessible when you're in the browser environment. They are only accessible on the server side. So what you can do here to be able to access, let's say, this environment variable inside the browser is to prefix it with next_public. So we're gonna go to our env.local and prefix this with next_public_. So when we set it like this and go back here, so I'm going to change wherever we have this. So whenever we change something in the environment, we are going to go ahead and restart our server. So I'm just going to stop it, terminate, then restart. So yarn dev. So we have next public underscore base URL. And if we come back here, make sure that's the one we're trying to access in the use effect. So it's going to refresh here. And if we go back to the browser and reload this. So when we change that, you can see that now here, we are getting the base URL in the use effect. So in the browser, we're able to access it now. But notice that our fetcher failed. We can't get from the server again. So we want to go ahead and update that. So let's come back here. And instead of using this, we can now use next public URL and save that. And now if we refresh, so using next_public enables it to be accessible both on the browser and also on the server side. But when we don't prefix with next_public, we can only access these only in the server side. So I'm going to be pausing here. Now in the next one, we're going to be talking about the head component, and also we're going to style our page better to make it look great. So I hope this was helpful. If it was, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I will talk to you in the next video.